Knowing this near universal pattern helps to assess new brands and existing ones.
What don't marketers know?
Quite a lot. Marketers, I actually live in an anything-goes world where the latest fashion or fad drives an awful lot of practice.
Segmentation is the recognition you can't serve everyone with equal satisfaction.
This is the Zac Anesbury Show.
Welcome. On today's podcast, we have Bob Moore. Bob is this podcast's first ever return guest, which is undoubtedly an honor for me as well as the audience. Now, Bob has had an extensive career in both brand management and consumer insights, primarily within the United States, and he's worked for some of the biggest companies in the world, brands you would know like Campbell Soup, Sara Lee, Nabisco, and of course, SC Johnson. We talk about what Bob has learned over the years by seeing the laws of growth in action, and of course, his growing and enduring affiliation with the Ehrenberg-Bass Institute, which stems from that infamous sabbatical. Being polygamously loyal, Bob listens to other podcasts, and he recommends a few of his favorite hosts, as well as a few of his favorite guests to listen to. He then also touches on and gives us some insights about his social media habits. Bob provides us with some timely insights as to how consumers will behave in inflationary and cost of living pressure times. He then shifts his attention to the future of marketing in relation to both virtual reality and artificial intelligence. Hosting Bob was a real treat, and the way in which he shares his experience and knowledge with us is something that we should all admire. So without further ado, Bob Moore. So for those of you who don't know, Bob is actually the very first return guest on the Zac Anesbury Show. So I guess it's commiserations to you, congratulations, but ultimately thank you from me and the community. For those of us who haven't listened to the first episode, and I would highly recommend they do, it's an excellent piece there. Did you want to provide us with a bit of an overview as to who you are and your background?
Sure. I am now retired from everyday work as a marketer and market researcher. I've had about a 30-year career in packaged goods marketing, about 8 years in brand management, 8 years in customer marketing, and the remaining in insights. And I worked for lots of pretty big packaged goods companies and a few small ones here in the U.S. I started my career at Nabisco Biscuit Company. I worked at Campbell Soup. I went back to Nabisco. When Nabisco was bought by Kraft Foods, I lost my job there and I had to leave, and I went to Sara Lee, and I worked on their household and body care division, running the Kiwi shoe polish brand. I left there to go to a smaller company called Irving Tissue, where I was a marketing director on Scotty's facial tissues. And I also helped them run a brand up in Canada called Royale, which had paper towels, bathroom tissue, and facial tissues. After I left Irving when they moved our headquarters from the Philadelphia area, which is where I was living, to Boston. And unfortunately, my timing was horrible. I did it right when we were entering the Great Recession of 2008, very end of 2008. I spent some time doing marketing consulting back at Sara Lee, where I had worked before, and eventually they rehired me. And that's where I got my insights career started. I did consumer insights as well as business analytics. SC Johnson bought the Kiwi shoe polish brand, and then I went to Wisconsin for the last 10 years of my career, where I worked in business analytics for SC Johnson. Now, while I was there was when we got introduced to the Ehrenberg-Bass Institute, and that gave me the opportunity to think about, to meet people who had come to visit. And then we had a sabbatical leave program at SEJ, and I asked if I could go to Ehrenberg-Bass on sabbatical and sort of do an academic sabbatical. And I did that in 2019. I was there for about 10 weeks, spent a lot of time with Zac at that point. We did some stuff. We even have an ANSMAC paper, I think, that we did together. And and then I came back and finished my career. And then when I was getting to the end, I'd asked Byron Sharp if I could come back after I had left SC Johnson because I thought what the Institute does is important. I'm interested in it. I thought I had some things to contribute. And he said yes. And so I was able to come back. And so early in 2023, I think from mid-February to the end of March, I was at the Institute again, trying to set up some collaborations so I could do some research after I returned to the US. So that's sort of my story. I'm pretty active on LinkedIn. I follow some people. I think most of the time, you might kind of call what I do trolling a little bit. If I see someone write something that's kind of silly, I might point out why it might be a little silly in a very nice way. But generally, I'm espousing Ehrenberg-Bass principles in my posts and supporting the Institute. One of the very fun things I did when I was there last time was I helped the Institute prepare for their mental availability and physical availability summit. They had summits that they had in Sydney, London, and New York. I started out at the very beginning with most of the people who are developing their seminars and helped them refine them and sort of make them maybe a little more relevant and understandable to practitioners. And I think that's really my value to the Institute, is that I understand the principles pretty well. And I also spend a lot of time in industry. And so I have a different perspective and can sort of help people tailor their presentations. And so I got a chance to do that while I was there. And my reward was I was invited to New York for the symposium in June, which was a lot of fun to go back and see everybody when they came back to the US to give the seminar. And I could see the finished product too. So it was great.
Yeah, absolutely. Far out. Yeah. So 2019, we first met. That feels just like yesterday. So I remember very vividly sitting down at the cafe on campus, Abbots and Kinney, having coffee pretty much every morning, talking about the gym that you were going. You're always swimming in the morning. And then mostly we're talking about the paper that we're working on and the data and how we're going to frame our story. So yeah, I remember those days quite vividly and quite fondly, actually. And then I think you went back to the States and we recorded the first podcast. Then it must have been early 2020. And that must have been...
it was in 2019 because it was on the 4th of July, you might recall.
Far out.
Yeah, because there was a parade I was supposed to go to on that day.
Yeah, that's right. I remember the parade part. I just wasn't sure which year it was. Okay, that makes sense. I should probably know that a little bit better. So you've been up to a hell of a lot since that, and you filled us up quite nicely. So one of the things that you said early on was that you have since retired. So you're working at SC Johnson, and now you've decided that you're going to kind of wrap it up. How long have you been retired for, and how are you finding that sort of different lifestyle?
I've been retired for 2.5 years, and I have to admit I don't miss working for money. I think one of the challenges with work for me is, when you work for a company, obviously you're doing things that, that you're being asked to do that are like in the company's interest. And it's maybe not always as much fun as you'd like to have. And so one of the benefits of being in academia is not all the time, but a lot of the time, probably a lot more of the time, you get to pursue your own interests. And I had really good bosses at SC Johnson, and especially at the end of my career, they kind of allowed me to do a lot of fun stuff, but there was still some stuff that was work. And I think I just had enough of it. I was 65 years old and just thought it was a time for me to stop working for money. I've sort of hung out my shingle as a consultant. I did consult with Sara Lee for about 14 months before they rehired me. And so I'm available to help people out. But the only thing I really want to do is marketing science. But I haven't really been beating the bushes trying to get more business, right? So I might have a gig coming up pretty soon, but I really haven't tried to work. I'm very fortunate that I don't need to work for money. So I'm just going to do what I want to do. And I think the thing about retirement that I like the best is that I can do what I want to do when I want to do it. And when I want to stop doing it, I can. So I do a lot of projects around our property. We have a pretty big property here that I live on. We're on a lake, which gives me some stuff to do down on the lake, but also in the yard. And sometimes I do big projects and I'll go out and I'll work on them for 3 or 4 hours and then I'm tired of it and I can just stop.
Mhm.
I don't have to keep going, and then I'll go back the next day and I'll do some more. And a couple of weeks I might finish it, but it's kind of nice to have that freedom. And I think that's what a lot of people like about not having to work for a living anymore.
Yeah.
I do miss, especially all the young friends that I had at SCJ. When you support marketing, you're supporting a younger clientele. Marketing is a young person's business, particularly brand management. And I think that's what I miss the most is my interaction with younger people. All the people I associated with, they went from their 30s all of a sudden to people mostly in their 60s and 70s.
Mm.
And then everybody is retired versus having careers and starting families and so on. So the younger people tend to be much more interesting. I'm afraid I'm getting kind of boring now. I hope not, but I do miss that. That's the big downside from not going to work every day.
Mm. Yeah, I kind of can relate to that actually when you're talking about, who you spend the time with. Funnily enough, a lot of my friends outside of work, especially are mostly 40, 50 plus, funnily enough. For some reason, I just enjoy their company. But at work, like I teach marketing principles, which is basically marketing 101 class, hundreds of students, and they're always, fresh out of high school, 18, 19-year-old. And I feel like they kind of keep me like young in that sense because, they come in, I hear their new ideas, their new perspectives, their new way of learning, actually. I've noticed a very distinct different want or need of how they actually want to learn. So yeah, no, 100% agree that way.
Yeah. So I don't get to interact with people like that very much anymore. So that's the big void in my life right now, I would say, from being retired. But I wouldn't trade it. I wouldn't go back to work. You're only given so many days on Earth, and still some things I want to do. There's some travel that I've got planned. I want to do some things, that still with the Institute. I've got a couple irons in the fire with Carl, and so we're trying to get some things going. We'll see how that works out. But at the end of the day, sort of having the freedom of action is a big deal for me.
Yeah, doing what you love when you want sounds phenomenal. Especially hiking. So I constantly see pictures of you hiking. The envy when I'm, really deep into a paper and I desperately love to be outside. Is definitely there. I found a new place. So last time when you visited, I took you through Belair. So I found a new hiking spot for us next time you're down in South Australia.
Okay, I don't know when I'll be back, but I will sign up for that now.
Yeah.
I mean, we're very fortunate here. We live in North Carolina, in a small town called Hickory, which is near the mountains. And within about an hour or less, I can be on a pretty nice trail out in the woods, hiking up to summits with great views, or up water courses to waterfalls. So it's really it's a nice place to live for that.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you sort of left SC Johnson, did you feel like you had, I mean, you could have kept working if you really wanted to, I guess. So you must have felt like you achieved everything you wanted to, or was there certain projects that you wish you had just a little bit more time on, or did you just sort of hand them to someone else?
I think it was a good time for me to leave SCJ at the time. And a lot of it had to do actually with sort of the philosophy of marketing. So things have changed there now, so it's not the same. But we had a CMO who was from a company where the velocity that products moved out was very, very much faster than SC Johnson products. And he sort of felt like the way you would grow is by driving frequency and loyalty. And he ended up not renewing our sponsorship. And so SEJ is still not a sponsor. So for a little while, I kind of felt like I was being like a little bit of a subversive, in the sense that I was kind of telling people always have to give people the right advice as I understand how the world works. And so, of course, and we'll probably talk about this maybe a little bit later, but before I went into packaged goods, I was an actual physical scientist, right? So I'm trained as a scientist. I have a PhD in chemistry. And so I know science when I see it, because I was a scientist for a good more than a decade. And so to me, the stuff that the Institute talks about and presents rings very true to me. And I saw it over and over again. I never saw anything that varied from the laws of growth when I was at SC Johnson, except for the obvious things like where I might see, a little excess loyalty or something or excess sharing from products that were, in limited distribution or something like that, sort of the normal things that cause, duplication of purchase not to be exactly perfect, right? So, I would see things like that, but at the end of the day, people were like going a different way from what I knew was true. And, we were going to be doing what I considered to be ineffective marketing. We were abandoning distinctive assets. Just a lot of things like that made it not the place for me anymore. And so it wasn't like they necessarily wanted to get rid of me because I was still contributing, but I could be uncomfortable, to them, and so I kind of had to watch myself a little bit, just because of the difference in philosophy, between what I believed and held true and what I would recommend versus, sort of what the CMO was espousing.
That's really interesting, actually, that you kind of felt like, I guess, some of the culture and some of the philosophies of the company had changed, and therefore maybe you weren't aligned, maybe you weren't the best fit. You probably know, so we're at the University of South Australia, and we're not merging, we're creating a new university with our previous competitors down the road, the University of Adelaide. So they both have very distinct cultures. And so that's one of the key things that people are, I guess, a little bit concerned about is what is the culture of the new university going to be like? And is it going to fit, your own personal views and philosophies? Like if you're aiming for a certain style of career, does that align with the university you were part of? Or does it align with the new university? Do I adjust? Do they adjust? So yeah, there's a whole lot of unknowns here at the moment in that space.
You should talk to Dr. Graham about that when he comes, because he's, in that situation where he's one of the few marketing scientists at his institution, right? So there's a lot of, he has, I asked him, how do you manage this, right? I can't remember his first name. Is it Phil Graham?
Charles Graham?
Charles Graham, yes. Yeah, he was telling me that, he would get students who were taught sort of the Kotlerian view of marketing, and then he would just sort of, kind of have to retrain them. But it was like he was able to coexist at that university with people who were teaching things that were quite different from, what would be taught at the University of South Australia. I think you'll eventually learn to adapt. But I think one of the things that's really nice, is that you have the Ehrenberg-Bass Institute, right, which is in some sense separate, from the university departments, right? So the institute can always continue to operate independently, right, being housed at the new university, and then you have an academic department that teaches marketing. Those two things don't have to be the same.
Yeah, ideally they are, but yes, and they're under the leadership of Larry Lockshin when he was our head of school. It very much became like a one entity, and so I think that's people's fear. So, when did I do my undergrad? Quite a while ago now, but during my undergrad, it was what you described that Charlie situation is now, where I'd be taught Kotler in one course, and then I'd be taught like a sharp sort of Ehrenbergian view in another. and then you'd go back to Kotler, and then you go back to Sharp. And sometimes even in the same semester, you would have people telling you different ways marketing worked.
Yes.
I don't think it helped my GPA, that's for sure. And it very much made me confused. But yeah, all of that's out now. So I think, yeah, hopefully we're in the position now at the time point where early 2024, for anyone listening, where we're developing curriculum. And then I think they develop the courses in the next few months or whatever. So yeah, there's lots of work to be done there. Carl's on it, thankfully. Carl's very good at sort of getting forward a good point of view. I think he's a perfect person for it. I might reach out to Charlie about that. Not sure he wants to hear from me. I've been bugging him about a paper, so he might not want to hear from me.
Well, he might want to talk to you about something different.
Yeah, that's true. Actually, I love it when he comes here. is very good value. I love chatting to him. But yeah, so you have a much better work-life balance now.
Yeah, I don't do any work.
Obviously you don't sit by idly. So you mentioned doing a little bit of consulting sort of stuff, and obviously a lot of leisure. So yeah, I really like this idea that you found yourself in a position where you do what you want to do because you don't have to. Like, you don't have to work for money anymore, and that must be quite liberating, I'd imagine. And then so you were mentioning working a little bit with Carl. So sort of, do you just touch on that when you need to, or the consulting stuff, and then you dip in and out with your? I'm just trying to understand how you go about work-life balance now.
It's sometimes I'm a little frustrated, sort of at the pace that things can move at the university.
Mm-hmm.
Because my pace of getting things done in the business world was much faster.
Yeah.
And this is not pointing fingers at anybody, but it feels like things kind of move slowly sometimes. And that was true, actually. That when I was there in 2019, I felt the same way. But typically, what Carl and I are doing, there's a couple things. One was, I gave a seminar when I first arrived in 2023. So just the last time.
Mm.
And it was, what I showed was, if you looked at the panel data and you sort of decomposed it into two separate periods, and you followed people who bought a brand and then what else they bought in the category, you found all kinds of interesting things were revealed that way, such as the fact that there really wasn't any such a thing as switching, right? And so we had some really strong proofs of that. And so one of the things that was suggested to me was that we write a paper for like maybe a more popular or crossover publication, something like HBR, where we would this would be something that could still be fairly rigorous academically, but of interest to the broader population, right? Mm-hmm. And written in an accessible way. So I've been working on that with Carl. We need to have some new data for that. The issue that we have right now, as you know, is the data would have to come from the Nielsen Kilts database, mm-hmm. which I don't have access to.
Yeah.
So, we're going to have to figure out how we finish this paper and get it published. When I can't read, I can kind of write the paper, but I can't really author it.
Mm.
So, you know what I mean? I can't be on the paper because of the restrictions on who has access to this data. Oh. And then there's some other things that we're doing. One of the things that I talked to Carl about back in 2019 was there's something that I observed over and over again in when I was running businesses, is that whenever I got new distribution in a new channel or a new retailer, I didn't see any diminution of sales of that product in other retailers. So like all of my distribution seemed to be incremental. And we jokingly called that Moore's Law. And so we've been kind of working on that. And the issue, there is some other data that's available to me. And so I've been working with Nick and some of the other people at the Institute to get the data in such a way that I can manipulate it and, go into Tableau and organize it. And there's still a few glitches in the data that are giving me some problems. I'm working with Nick. I think he's back next week.
Yeah.
So I asked something around the beginning, right near Christmas, right? Well, Nick went on holiday. He's not back. So like nothing's happening because I have to wait. So that makes me impatient, and it's not Nick's fault.
No,
There's a lot of holiday. So we're working on those kinds of things. One of the really interesting things, I just sent something to Carl, is that may not require any data from Kilts, but in the sort of this distribution thing, there's something interesting going on in Europe right now where Carrefour and Pepsi are at odds with each other. And Pepsi said they took their products out of distribution at Carrefour, and Carrefour says, no, you didn't. We kicked you out. And so all of their categories, snacks, beverages, other things that they have, I can't remember some of the other categories, are not going to be sold in Carrefour. And I sent a note to Carl and said, hey, this is a real live Moore's Law case happening right now. And, my prediction is that, Pepsi's business will not increase materially outside of Carrefour, and that Carrefour's business will go down, but not because some people, not as much as Pepsi's, because some people will switch, right? But not many people will go to a different store when they can't find Pepsi products in Carrefour.
Yeah.
So that's kind of, I'm like, this is happening now. Let's get the data, and so we may be able to do something with that, right now. So I'm excited about that.
Yeah.
So that's kind of what we're doing. And I think that's why I think if you were to ask if there was something that was missing in my life and undone when I retired, it's really the Ehrenberg-Bass stuff to me. It's that kind of research, because I really feel like I have some interesting observations and ideas and things that I've seen that you haven't seen because you haven't looked at them. You haven't looked at things the same way I have.
Mm-hmm.
And they turn out to be, when I talk to people about it, they're like they found they're very interesting and important. And it's like, I had no idea they would be interesting and important. To me, they're just things that I saw and I thought, oh, well, everybody knows about this, but they don't, And so the fact that I feel like I have something to contribute and not having a way to do it, a formal way to do it, and, being halfway around the world from the Ehrenberg-Bass Institute doesn't help in some ways, right? Because it's much harder to collaborate. It is, I think that if I were retired from a business and I were in Adelaide, I'd be in the office every day. It would be my second job, even if you didn't pay me. I would still be happy to show up because it's kind of like my fun new hobby.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I completely understand that. When you're tackling a really exciting, problem that exists in the world, or, a question that has no answer, it is extremely satisfying to kind of work on. Like, you wake up in the morning, and some days I just can't wait to get to the office. So no, I completely agree with you. The writing up of the results then can take a little bit of a while and try to explain that logic to someone else. I won't out this person, but I remember someone once said to me, I'm really struggling to write this paper. I've been doing it for the last 6 months, and I have no motivation to do it because I already know the answer. And they're like, so my mind's already solved this problem and I want to move on, but I'm like pushing myself back 6 months ago so I can actually, disseminate that to everyone else.
Yeah, I know who that person is.
So we spoke earlier about, when you were at SCJ, one of the reasons you liked going in was because you started speaking to and hanging around with people who were, in their 20s, 30s, 40s. And obviously the demographics change now a little bit. Do you still have contact with people, I guess, there that you're mentoring, or people elsewhere? And has that, do you see value in that? What sort of, for them, I guess, and also for yourself?
I do. I think it's getting less and less over time, which would make sense. But there is, I'll give you a good example. There is a young guy there that I actually when I first came back from Ehrenberg-Bass, he had just come from, was actually, had been in the U.S. military. He was in the Army. He went to West Point, which is their military academy, and he served 5 or 6 years. And we hired him to do market research and consumer insights without him having ever done anything like that. We've hired a bunch of people at SEJ from the military in this market research area, and we just teach them what they need to know. And so he was going from consumer insights to business analytics. So when I came back from the sabbatical leave in 2019, he was just moving into the analytics realm. And I sort of took him under my wing and helped train him on all the things that we did. Really got him sort of into Ehrenberg-Bass. He was already down that road in pretty good ways, but we did a lot of stuff together when I was there. Like one of the things that we did that was pretty interesting was there was a new product that was brought out in the insecticide category, which was safer for pets and kids and things like that. And, of course, everybody's thinking, oh, we're going to get category rejectors in here, people who don't like insecticides. We're going to expand the category. So we went in and we showed that all the people that were using this stuff, or they were heavy users of the category before this was even introduced, right? It's the kind of stuff that it's what you would have expected if you know how how the laws of growth work, right? But it was very satisfying to go in and say, oh, here's our hypothesis about this. And people are thinking, oh, we're bringing in all these new people. And we're like, no, you're not. And it wasn't our product. It was, another company's product. But it was, being able to, I kind of raised him with that kind of stuff. And so now he and I still talk about stuff. I mean, obviously, SEJ does stuff that's confidential, but occasionally he'll say, oh, I found this really, like one of the things he's doing is a longitudinal study. I had done one in 2015 when I was there. And I looked at 10 years of panel data. So you look at people that are continuously in the panel, and he's doing something like that. And so I said, well, let's make sure that you're answering all the questions, but you're also demonstrating all the laws of growth, right? Something that like 98% of people who use Windex, right? They buy it once a year or less, right? So you can't have a frequency strategy with Windex. Almost everybody barely buys it, right? So he's been able to take, and we sort of taught when he was setting this up. I'm giving him some free consulting where I'm saying, okay, here's some of the things that you want to do to make sure that you're reinforcing. This is how the consumer really works, how categories are really bought, how brands really compete, right? So he has an opportunity, even in an environment where people are maybe not so much accepting of these things anymore, to basically say, hey, this is the way it is, right? This is what we saw in the panel. And so that was fun to help him with that.
Yeah.
I have some other friends that I see occasionally. I'm actually going back to Racine in a week for a friend of mine who's just retired, and he's having a big party. So I'm going back at the worst time of the year. It's going to be like 20 degrees below 0 Celsius.
Wow.
It's going to be very cold, very cold. I'm not looking forward to that, but I'm going back to go. And so I will see a bunch of those people again. So I am in touch with them, but I would say this one guy is the one that I'm, most in touch with in terms of, being able to sort of help him out. I told you I might have a consulting gig coming up in a month or two. That's also a former SEJ guy. He actually had left and gone to Kimberly-Clark. He worked on the Kleenex brand there. Now he's moving to a small entrepreneurial company. And he was like, hey, how do I get, what can you give me some advice on what to do to sort of get these Ehrenberg-Bass principles into my organization? So he's calling me and asking me for some help with that. And, one of the things he might do is try to become a sponsor. So, so I'm working with some people like that, but it's been more, it's more catch as catch can rather than, something that I set out to do. It's kind of opportunistic, I guess is probably a better way to say it.
Yeah. So you just touched on the Institute. So you visited in 2019 and again in 2023. You're, I think, the only external person I'm aware of that's actually somewhat on our, internal communication channels, which is, very, very unique, that's for sure. And when you were in Adelaide last time, I don't know if you remember this, but Rachel Kennedy, our Associate Director of Special Projects, I think it's called, referred to you as being, part of the family. So, very, very honorary thing there. When you visited, what was, I guess, what were you looking to achieve, and did you end up getting some of those key things done, or are you obviously you're still working on some of those?
I mean, the first time it was really more back in 2019. It was to get a much more in-depth understanding of laws of growth and sort of how everything worked and how the institute worked and all that. And having been a former academic, before I was in packaged goods, I kind of did know how the university worked, and none of that stuff surprised me necessarily. But it was really about making those contacts. The second time, it was really more about how do I get set up to do some real research. And I think the one thing that was probably most disappointing to me, we talked a little bit about the Nielsen Kilts data. I mean, it's for academics only, right? And I'm not an academic. I don't have an academic affiliation. And there really wasn't anything that was suitable for me at the university. I couldn't get like some kind of honorary title, and that would satisfy the Nielsen Kilts people. The only thing that I could have done to get access to the data was to become a PhD student. And so I actually applied. I don't know if you know this or not, but I applied to become a PhD student at the university. And it's kind of a long story, but the bottom line was they weren't willing to give me like a scholarship because I already had a PhD. In some ways, I thought that was kind of silly, because I think that what we were trying to do was allow me to work with the university. And I think, one of the key missions of the university is the creation and dissemination of knowledge.
Yeah. And
that's what I was trying to do. And whether I had a PhD or not was irrelevant, right? It just seems very strange to me that was the reason, and to be honest with you, Zach, I didn't really necessarily want to get another PhD, but I was willing to do it so that I could do the other stuff that I wanted to do.
Yeah.
In some ways, it let me off the hook, right? But I still don't have access to the data that I really like. And I have some ways of looking at that data and manipulating it and so on that I think could add a lot of value to the kinds of stuff that you do at the Institute. And so I feel like there's an opportunity there that's being missed, but there's not much I can do about it. I mean, I guess I could pay tuition, fees, and all that stuff to enter the PhD program, but I guess I don't want it that badly, right?
Yeah.
So it's like, I'm just trying to find. I kind of feel like I'm a very unusual person in the sense that I'm willing to do stuff like this for free, and I don't really. I don't want to. This is not a job I'm looking for. I just want to be part of. I want to be part of something that's important, and I kind of feel like I've been blocked from that a little bit, and that's unsatisfying to me. But I mean, I feel like in terms of like everybody at the Institute was like, yeah, like let's get Bob going, and we have some ways. Just like I said, I do have another data source. It's some very, very old IRI data, that I'm working with. Like I said, there's a few issues with it. I'm trying to work through, get so that the data is really usable. So I might still be able to do that. Something like the Pepsi-Cola situation in Europe. I mean, that's not Nielsen Kilts data, right? We should be able to do some things with that. So I think there might be some other things that we can do to, achieve some of the stuff I want to do, but I kind of feel like that I'm a little concerned that I'm never going to get there because these barriers keep coming up, right? And it's not barriers that the Institute's putting up because everyone's been super welcoming. They are very, like to your point, I'm on the internal communications. It's like I'm an honorary member of the Institute in some ways. That's the way I feel.
Absolutely.
And I totally feel like I belong and that I have the right to say what, I know my place, right? But if, people, I can say whatever I want to anybody and it's fine. And I'm helping find a venue in the US for the executive laws of growth training. So I'm working with Elke on that. So I feel like I'm really a part of things and I would like to be a bigger part of things, but there's other, the university in particular is sort of putting up some barriers for me.
Yeah. Computer sort of says no sort of situation where logical says like this is a great opportunity. Hopefully with the new universities, like maybe the policy would change where they're more willing to, grant access or whatever it happens to be to
I have the sense that it's not that. I think they were looking for some kind of excuse, to be honest with you, because when I initially applied, they said to Carl, "Oh, he's good. He's in." And then they were like, "When's he coming to Australia?" And Carl's like, "Well, he's not." And they're like, "Well, everybody has to come to Australia." And he's like, "Well, why?" I said, "He's already got a PhD. He's got 30 years of work experience. He doesn't need the kind of supervision someone who's 25 years old might need, right? Or that support even." So then they couldn't just say, "Oh, okay." And they kind of had to go back and we had to resubmit. And so, it feels like there was something about, I think there might have been something else. And you can't come up with, well, he already has a PhD. We're not going to fund that. I could have seen them saying, well, if he's not going to come and live in Australia, we're not going to fund it because we should be spending our money to improve Australia. That to me, that's a better excuse to not fund me than the fact I already have a PhD.
Yeah. Yes, he might be a better candidate. No, crazy. So we have like visitors here like semi-regularly, and most of the time they're here for 2-3 days, maybe a week tops, and like my experience with them is, they'll come early on. We often encourage to give a seminar or a presentation so everyone can understand who they are, where they're from, and I guess their research or industry expertise. And then usually for however long they're here, their calendar's pretty much booked. Every hour someone's taking them out for coffee or lunch or dinner. It must be a bit of a different experience when you're here for a longer period of time. How would you explain that to someone else if they were thinking, oh, I'd like to take a sabbatical and go to a university rather than just being like a visiting academic for, 2, 3, 4 days?
Yeah. I think it's important to have a plan. I initially wanted to, when I first came for sabbatical, to sort of get set up and maybe even start doing some research while I was still at SCJ. And that didn't go over very well. I think I didn't have a very good plan of attack on, what I was going to do and how I was going to ask for things. And so I ended up spending my time doing other stuff and kind of learning the ropes. So I would say that the best thing to do if you're going to do a sabbatical is, I would say, if when I came back the second time, I knew I wanted to work with Carl Treisner, right? So the whole point was for me to come and spend some time with Carl to figure out what we were going to do and how we were going to do it, right? So that was the objective. So I would say my advice, if you want to come for 6 or 8 weeks or however long your sabbatical would be, that you come to, first off, whenever you come, you want to basically enter fully into the academic life of the Institute.
Mhm.
I taught some classes while I was there this last time. I gave a seminar. I helped people who were working on presentations, gave feedback that way. I met with students on their projects, right? So not as many as I would have liked, but I did meet with the students. And I think, one of the things that we're still struggling a little bit with post-COVID, not everybody was coming in all the time. And I think that was part of the problem with meeting people this time. But, the main thing is to have something very definitive worked out ahead of time on who you're going to be doing what with. And that'd be my advice, because I didn't have that the first time I came. I came looking for it and didn't really find it to the extent that I wanted to. Now, you and I did a couple things,
Mm.
and I got into the data a little bit, but I think that I would have been the second time was much more successful, and I was able to get more done in a short period of time.
Yeah, I think that's really solid advice, is sort of map out plans and meetings and projects almost before you get there, so then you can hit the ground running. Yeah, I think that's really solid advice. Um, so you attended the Mental and Physical Availability Summit in New York, was it?
Yes.
Yeah, so I went to the one that was in Adelaide, but I know there was other ones, in Australia and Europe. How did you find the summit?
I thought it was great. Of course, I'll feel that way because I helped prepare it. But
Biased.
so I have a biased point of view. But no, I think that what was good about it was a lot of the stuff that I saw was still very rough, and I was sort of helping out, and there were some things that had to actually, I kind of got them down a path, and they really had to be completely torn down and rebuilt. And so
Mm,
some stuff looked really different. Some of it looked the same, but some of it looked really different. But seeing the final product was really great. What I thought was very, very good about it was for sponsors only.
mhm,
And so the audience that was there because they really wanted to be there, and they really wanted to learn, and they were super engaged. And so there was a lot of really good conversation at breaks. It was very well run in the sense that once everybody came out of the room, there was no problem with icebreakers. Everybody was talking to everybody, lots of questions. So very, very, very strong summit in terms of content and engagement. And I think people went away very happy with that they had come.
mm. Yeah, I've heard nothing but good things, and some of the messages that we've gotten back from sponsors are, yeah, just how engaging and enjoyable it actually was. So with the Institute, how are you planning to, obviously you got some projects working with Carl. Are there any other things that you've got lined up to sort of stay engaged?
No, I'm like I said, they've asked for my input on like where should we have the summit
Mhm.
in the U.S. And so I've given some suggestions on places to go that are not New York or Chicago. That would be kind of fun places to go for the people from the Institute as well as from the U.S. Um, so I'm hoping that I'll get an invitation to come to the executive training.
Mhm.
As being sort of the man on the ground in the U.S. That would be a lot of fun. If I can't, that's fine. I understand why. It's certainly limited for space and so on. But I think mostly what I'm trying to do is, sort of stay involved through the research. Doing reading. I think one of the things that's been nice about being retired is I have a lot more time for things like reading marketing books. I'm reading a couple books on behavioral science now. And I think when we were talking on the first podcast, you asked me if I read business books, and I was like, no, I
Mhm.
don't. I work, but now it's like that's the part of my life that's missing,
Mhm.
right? So I go before it was like that's what I did all the time. So I didn't take the business books on the airplane, right?
Mm.
But now I'm like I don't have that anymore. So now I'm reading this stuff,
Mm.
and so and I have time to listen to podcasts. A lot of times when I'm working in the yard, I've got a podcast on, and I'm some podcasts while I'm like moving rocks and things, so it's, keeping me sort of fresh and engaged and, what's going on. I think one of the things that I'm concerned, I don't want to say it's really concerning, but I think it's kind of inevitable in some sense that I'm going to be seeing like an erosion of skills because I don't do the stuff every day anymore. Right. So from my perspective about like, what would I be good at for consulting? When I first left SCJ, I could have gone in, basically, if someone was looking to replace like a director of insights or something, I could have said, hey, you know what, if you need somebody to like fill in till you get your permanent person, I could do that for you. Right. I don't know that I could do that anymore. Right. Because I'm 2.5 years into retirement. I feel like the skills are getting a little rusty. And so that's why I'm really trying to keep the marketing science stuff fresh and strong. And, because I don't want to lose my edge there. And so I'm continuing to, work on that kind of stuff.
Yeah. Well, if you're reading more, have you ever thought about writing more? Not necessarily for Harvard Business Review or an academic journal or a conference. You could write a book. Is that something you've ever considered?
I have, but I wish I had kept notes.
Yeah.
Because I have a lot of good stories, as you know. So I would probably, your memory gets twisted over time, right? You remember things that didn't happen, and things that did happen, you forget. And so my memoirs would probably be very highly inaccurate these days. But I mean, I just remember there was so much silliness that I saw marketers do that I could probably write a book about that. But it feels slightly mean-spirited for one thing. And then although no names would be named, of course, right? The guilty would be remain anonymous. But I think that I don't know that I have the depth of experience in anything to sort of write a book. But I think that I can write articles. I can write, this article about how switching doesn't really happen, right? That what you see when you look at a buyer flow analysis and you look and you say, well, here's people that bought the category or bought the brand in both years, and here's the people that bought it this year and not the next, and you start looking and you start drilling down into what they're buying in the category. What you find is that the reason that people left you is because the buyer flow analysis picks the people who are the light buyers because they left the brand. They didn't buy it 2 years in a row. So you're looking at light buyers and heavier buyers, and they behave in predictable ways. And you end up with a lot of results that would be surprising to most marketers because they don't think people who are managing a brand, they think people that buy the brand, that they kind of own those people, that those are their buyers. And those buyers are like, if they buy something else, like they're not being loyal. Well, it turns out that, people are polygamously loyal. And what's really interesting is you just see how widespread that is when you do a buyer flow analysis and you look at the rest of the category. And so, that's the kind of thing which is really interesting. It's something that most marketers would find surprising. I think they might find it useful and humbling a little bit, and might make them think about how they would market their brand differently if they knew just how disloyal their buyers are. And so to me, that's like an important paper to write and get out there and to get published and to talk about, because it's not the way people think. And and part of it's because of this Kotlerian view of how you're taught about, you're segmenting the market and you have your target and you're going to try to satisfy them to drive the loyalty and all of those kinds of things that don't really happen the way that they're described in the textbook.
Mm.
And so, and that's the thing that, I keep sort of pounding away at, in my LinkedIn posts and when I'm working with, my friends that are like at other companies now, and now that I'm no longer at SUJ, that this is the way the world really works, and it's really important that you understand that. So that's kind of what motivates me, and I think I could write these small little things.
Mm.
I think I could write a book.
Yeah. You could write case studies or chapters or something in someone else's book as well. Whole host of different options, because obviously,
But I do have an issue. I do have an issue with case studies, though.
Okay.
So case studies are post hoc rationalizations, right? And there's no counterfactual. This is part of the problem with the way marketing is taught, right? Marketing, I learned marketing through doing case studies, Harvard Business School case studies, right? And so, you're presented with something and then you're asked what to do. And of course, you're doing it within the context of what you were taught with Kotler. And there's kind of like a right answer and a wrong, right? Well, the fact that the company did something and they failed or they didn't fail, it doesn't mean that their actions were the reason that they failed or didn't fail, right? It's all you're seeing is what happened, right? And there's no proof, right? This is why the laws of growth are so important, right? Because they tell you how the marketplace should work. Someone could say, well, I have a really good example. We had a brand at SEJ that was a natural brand that we bought, and we started growing it. We started putting some money behind it. But the people who were doing the marketing originally, they were doing all this really high cost, low reach stuff, like trade, like stuff like going to trade shows and sampling. And they would sample with a full bottle of product. And they would say, we have this super loyal group of people that love our stuff and they're buying it. Well, when you did the panel data and you looked at it, you found that 85% of their buyers who bought this year didn't buy the next year, right? It was classic light buyers of the brand, and the people who bought them were heavy buyers of the category, all the things that you would learn. So they did all this stuff and they said, this is why they were successful and why they grew. Well, the reason they grew is they kept expanding their distribution network, right? And they kept getting more and more product, and eventually they got more mainstream advertising, and they grew their mental and physical availability. And it was mostly the physical availability that was driving all their growth. So then they go and they take this brand to Europe and they go with this playbook. Now, the business analytics people, me and again, my friend who I was helping there, were saying, no, right? Don't listen to that. Like, this is what you need to do to grow. Well, they listened to what the marketers did and the brand failed, right? So they had a case study, right? And again, it's like there's no counterfactual to it. The brand, they did all this stuff and the brand grew. And I would argue that the brand grew in spite of what they did, right? And they were very fortunate they were able to grow the brand. And so they did some things right, but they didn't know what the right things were because they were focusing on their consumer part of it, when the reality is all that they were really doing was making their product available to more people on more shopping occasions. And they found the product in the store and bought it. And, and again, they had repeat business and all that kind of stuff. And they did a lot of things right. But the thing that they thought drove the business, especially at the beginning, was not the thing that drove the business, right? And so again, it's like, so for me, it's case studies kind of like it's like a couple of dirty words, because they say, well, look, I did this and it worked, so this is what you should do, and there's no science behind it. It's just it's just an observation. It might be true and it might not be.
That's a very good point, actually. So, you're retired, but still very active in the marketing sort of space. And I see that a little bit on LinkedIn. So you're, I think from an outsider's perspective, fairly active on LinkedIn in terms of, you post your own content or you comment on others. Is there like method behind this madness, or is there a reason you do this, or you refer to it as somewhat trolling? Yeah, well, so you obviously enjoy it.
my favorite thing to do is to send like the stuff like the Napa Summit. We have a new guy running the Insights arena at SCJ, and see, he's not going to renew the sponsorship. I know it, right? And I'm like, I'll send him stuff and say, it's a great opportunity for you. Only sponsors can come. Maybe you should renew the spot. So that's a little bit of my naughtiness. That's polling I do. But no, it's like I will see people, one of the things that's really interesting when we were going through COVID, we were talking about going into recession. There's a lot of posting about recessions and about private label and about consumers adopting private label and all this kind of. So this is a good example of stuff that I would do. So someone would post something about how consumers were going to switch to private labels because they were going to be economically stressed. Well, I did a study at SEJ in 2015 where I looked at people that were in the Nielsen household panel continuously for 10 years. And the Great Recession in the US, 2008, 2009, happened right in the middle of the time frame we were looking at. So we thought this is a great opportunity for us to look at what happens in a recession. So we looked for exactly this phenomenon, that when the recession hit, people would switch to private labels and value brands, and we couldn't see it. We didn't see it at all. And but they were growing during this time frame, but we didn't see consumers doing it. We didn't see people switching in a big way. So we said, well, maybe it's looking at everybody is too broad a group. Let's find people that lost income, right? And see if those people switched. And what we found was those people didn't switch either. The repertoires didn't change at all from what they were doing before and after they lost income. And we looked at people who gained income, and their repertoires didn't change, right? So the quantity that they bought, the types of products they bought, the amount of private label and value brands they bought, none of it changed. So, when people are saying, well, people are going to switch, I would say, well, I have some evidence that they don't switch, right? So you could then say, well, why does private label grow in a recession? And I would say it's because people think consumers are going to switch, particularly retailers. And so they will add private label to their assortment. And now private labels become more physically available. They've had to replace something else. Some branded product has come off the shelf. The proportion of private label is switched. It's just more available to buy. And so there's actually, see, this is a PhD thesis at Ehrenberg, University of South Australia. Like you could say, if the hypothesis is that the reason private label grows is because retailers put it in distribution rather than consumers switch, you could look during a recession and you could say, all right, let's find all the categories where the distribution of private label changed versus where it didn't change, and see, did private label sales go up or not, right? It's a simple hypothesis, right? Like if private label didn't grow, like let's say I'm looking at the yogurt category in Belgium or something, right? And it was like branded, the amount of branded distribution didn't change in a recession, right? The hypothesis would be that private label didn't grow in that category in recession, but if they added it to, I don't know, breakfast cereal or something, right? That if private label increased there, that it would go up. And it's like, it's true that if you have zero private label in a section, zero will be bought because it's not available. And if it's 100%, right, that's the only thing that could be, it'll be 100. So as you change the proportion, it's going to change the amount people buy. And it is consumers buying it, but they're not necessarily changing their behavior. They're just buying what's on the shelf, right? So, so there was some guy who did, he did some posts, and I said, well, you might want to consider distribution. And he goes, well, my data is very accurate. And he just kind of like pushed back on me. And I was like, okay, whatever, right? I was not going to argue with this guy in public about that. But so to me, like if someone is saying something and I just happen to see it, and I know it's wrong or it's just an assumption, right? It's not necessarily proven in a rigorous way, then I will often comment on it, or
Yeah.
I might ask, like, can you show me the evidence for this, right? Because I take that scientific approach, because there's just so much in marketing that's just someone's opinion,
Yeah.
right? Or based off of something that's not particularly true.
Yeah. I think I don't think the comments or posts that you make are particularly mean-spirited. It's more about engaging in that debate about ideas and stuff. So I think that's kind of nice. It's never an attack on the person itself, which is good. So we've spoken recently about the weather event near your place and almost losing the pier and everything like that. And then that kind of segues to listening to podcasts when you're cleaning debris or doing the gardening and stuff like that. I'm offended. I thought you were a sole listener of the Zac Anesbury show.
I'm polygamously loyal, Zach.
Yeah, knowing what I do about polygamous loyalty, are you listening to other marketing shows or business shows, or are you listening to just other stuff? Is there anything cool we should all be listening to as well?
Yes. My favorite, beside the Zac Anesbury show, is Uncensored CMO.
Oh, yeah.
My name is John Evans. I don't know if you've ever listened to him.
Yeah, I have. Yeah, he's interviewed Byron, I think, right? I think I've listened to that episode and a few of the others around that one, yeah.
Yeah, Byron, he interviewed Byron. He has a lot of interesting guests. I don't agree with everything that he says or talks about, but I think for the most part, he's pretty solid. And he's very open to feedback. Like if I listen to a podcast and I was maybe disappointed that he didn't get to something, I might just send him a note on LinkedIn because we're connected, and he responds 100%.
Wow.
I like his stuff. He has Les Binet and Sarah Carter is one of the more recent ones that he's got. I haven't listened to that yet. I'm taking a long car ride, so I'm going to listen to that on my car ride when I go up to Wisconsin. There's a German guy. I can't remember his name now, but his podcast is Mark and Craft. And again, I think he's interviewed Nicole and Byron and Jenny.
Yeah. I thought that sounded familiar.
Yeah. And he has some that he does in German, right? But and there's always a little bit of German at the beginning. And but mostly they're in English, and he's pretty good. There's another one called Marketing Books, and occasionally I will listen to that one if I think they have a good book. There are some guests that I really like. There's a guy named Bob Hoffman, who's like this sort of New York, New Jersey kind of tough guy, and he talks a lot about advertising. He wrote a book called Marketers are from Mars and consumers are from New Jersey. And so instead of the Mars Venus thing, it's kind of like the marketers are way out there, and like they're so disconnected from the way consumers really behave and the way they think about brands and the way they care about brands. So he's very practical. He's very active in sort of criticizing sort of all the spying that Google and Facebook and these sort of big technology companies do on you and selling your information. He's very passionate about that, and he's a very funny guy. So a lot of times I listen to podcasts, some of them based on who's in the podcast, some of them based on who's hosting the podcast.
Yeah.
So I have a number, and I will listen to everything that John Dawes does, or Jenny or Byron and Nicole, whoever from Ehrenberg-Bass is on. I'm always listening to those because I find it, even though I feel like I have a strong understanding of the principles, there's nuances that come up.
Yeah.
And like Jenny's particularly good at explaining things, and so I really enjoy listening to her as well. So, that's kind of what I'm doing when I'm, out moving rocks in the yard or whatever it is I'm doing, spreading mulch. I'm listening to those kinds of things.
If you find a podcast about John Dawes talking about the Net Promoter Score, his recent article about that just won an award at an international conference. So for best paper in the Australasian Marketing Journal. So voted for by practitioners actually.
Yeah, and I've sent that again, and sort of in my trolling profession of LinkedIn. I found a guy who I know is like really into Net Promoter Score, and I kind of sent him John's podcast. Said you should listen to this on your next plane ride, knowing that it was going to be the opposite of probably what he wanted to hear, but I think he needed to hear it.
It's a very, very well thought out piece, I think. So at the moment, we're currently in, inflationary times. A lot of westernized markets are, experiencing high interest rates. Cost of living crises is what they kind of refer to it in the media. I guess you kind of touched on it a little bit before, but in what way do you think consumer behavior would change or anything marketers should be aware of in this sort of situation?
Well, I think, I don't think they're going to be going to private label. On their own, right? I think if presented with more of it, they will buy more of it. But I mean, I think what I keep hearing in the US is that people are going into debt.
Mm-hmm.
They're not allowing their lifestyle to change. I think certainly in the US, I think we're seeing maybe it's a light at the end of the tunnel. We had bad inflation, but it was only really bad for about a year or 18 months. And the high interest rates have probably done a lot. And also the fact that we've had less fiscal stimulus here. It feels like we're coming out of it. Now, I don't know. I've lived through bad inflation when I was a young person, and it's terrible.
Yeah.
To have it high inflation for an extended period of time. I mean, I think the first house I bought, my mortgage interest rate was over 12%. And just it's just, and you never seem to get caught up. Like you get a raise, and then you feel like the next month you're in the hole again. So I never want to see that again in any country. But I think that we're kind of at the light at the end of the tunnel. We're finally starting to see wages catch up. But for someone like me, I'm fortunate in that, like I said, I don't have to work for money anymore. But the fact that a lot of I don't have a lot of big expenses that I have to cover, and so the fact that inflation is happening is really only at the margins for me. So I'm very fortunate. But if you were to look at sort of like what my income is, which is kind of fixed, right, versus what the new price level is, if I did not have that sort of cushion, I would be in real trouble, because I would be running at about maybe 90% of what my standard of living would be. I think it's tough. And I think the people who are really, 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 really pinched will do some things, right, to control their spending. But what I think they really do is it's going to be bigger things. So like if it's an inflationary time or you're pinched, right, and you have to save money at the store, how much do you really save by buying a bottle of private label glass cleaner for $1 less than you buy Windex, right? It doesn't make a big difference in your life. People spend $50 a year on cleaners, right? And so we can spend $45 a year. That doesn't really help you if you do that kind of scrimping, right? Well, but you could maybe cut your cable bill. You could maybe get a cheaper phone plan. Maybe you could cancel subscriptions. Maybe, so there's a lot of things that you can do that have a bigger, more meaningful impact. And some of it might just be foregoing some of your normal spending. Like, I'm not taking a vacation this year, right? I think the bigger thing that people are going to be facing in the US anyway, for a while is going to be the cost of housing. The monthly mortgage payment has almost doubled from 4 years ago. And that has to do with two things. One, sort of a shortage of housing, and the demand has gone up, and so the prices have gone up. But then add on top of that, increased mortgage interest rates. And now your monthly payment goes up because of that too. It's made it very difficult for people to buy a home. And then the supply, it's unlike Australia where mortgage rates adjust for most people. Most people have a fixed mortgage. I have a mortgage on this house and it's fixed at 3.25%. Right. So now if I were to move and I needed to mortgage somewhere else, it would be 7% or 6%. And so people like me might not want to move because so that causes supply issues too. So I really think that, they're not going to, the behaviors that are going to change are not going to be like in the packaged goods categories necessarily. It's going to be more in the bigger things, like I say, you're not buying a car, you're not moving, you're not going on vacation, you're finding a different, mobile phone provider, stuff like that. I think that's where people are going to make their changes.
Yeah, so it's really about, if you're a marketer, it's about which categories you're operating in as to the effect that it will have. That makes a lot of sense.
I think so, and I think also, it's pretty well known now. I mean, and especially I remember when we had COVID hit, and we thought the economy was going to crater during COVID. We brought out everything we could find on what you should do during a recession to go to the finance people to say, don't stop advertising. Now's the time, where you can really get traction and so on, right? To, maintain your share of voice when everybody else is panicking and cutting. And, so, those are the kind of things that are going to be important to think about, right? And so companies could be making missteps, right? In terms of, sort of being penny wise and pound foolish by cutting advertising when, you can get a bigger share of voice at a lower cost if you stay the course.
Yeah, and the Institute has a lot of good research there about what happens if you actually do stop advertising. So when brands grow dark, if you're a sponsor and you're listening to this, definitely look at that research. So in our last podcast, which I've recently revisited, and very much enjoyed it, we spoke a little bit about what we thought would happen in the future for marketing, and we touched on things like artificial intelligence and virtual reality. I know you've been retired for over a couple of years now, but have you seen any of that coming through, maybe marketing analytics or anything like that?
A little bit. I would say the last project I worked on at SCJ was I had to step in for somebody on a different business. I can't remember if they left the company or went on leave or something, but I ended up doing a project where we were bringing out a new product and we were doing some shelf research, and we did some virtual reality stuff on, sort of the difference between, where should this be on the shelf? And we asked a lot of questions like that. And so that was like literally my last project that I did before I left. And, so I think when we talked last time, I said that I thought shopper research was where virtual reality had a real opportunity, because it's very difficult. Shopper research is very difficult because once the shopper knows they're being watched, they stop being a shopper. They start being your confederate, right? And they try to help you, and so you kind of have to spy on them, or ambush them some way by ask them to do something that's not where your product just happens to be part of what they do, and it's not. They don't know that that's what they're being tested on. And so you can do that with virtual reality. How accurate it is, I think that remains to be seen. And I don't know any more about it because I've been gone for a couple of years, so I can't really comment on it. But I still feel like there's a role for that. I think AI is interesting. I think there's going to be a lot of applications for it, but like people are saying, well, AI can write the ads and so on. Well, if you ask AI to write an ad, what you should actually expect is to get an average ad, because AI is going to look at all the ads that have ever been made, and it's going to take sort of all the information and put it together. And this John Evans guy that I was telling you about, the uncensored CMO, he works at a company called System One, and they've tested some of these AI ads, and guess what they found? They found they were very average, right? So AI can, I think, be very helpful in a lot of ways. I don't think it's going to make things like advertising creative better. I think you still need humans for that. And I think that the humans are going to do it better. But AI is, you have to train AI, right? If you can train AI on what are the best ads, then AI might be able to come up with a really good ad. But if you just start with everything, if you start with the universe, you're going to get the average for everything you do.
Yeah.
So I don't know. I mean, I haven't tried to use it. I've had some friends troll me a little bit where they have AI write like a little paragraph about me. They're pretty amusing. Yeah, it's I think that there's a lot of smarter younger people and that are going to figure this out and find ways to really leverage it. I think that I don't know that it's going to replace people though.
Yeah, I think it's I agree with you on the replacing people thing. I think it'll end up making us more efficient and effective at our jobs. So I kind of liken it to, having a calculator or Excel or, SPSS or another tool that we can use to make what we already do faster.
Well, how about Google?
Google, right?
I mean, think about it. Like when I was a teenager, right? Like if I had a question about something, I had to go look it up in an encyclopedia or a dictionary. Now I just type it in. Like if I'm trying to spell a word, I just start typing in the word into the phone and I don't have to look at a dictionary and figure out what it's like. Google will tell me what the right spelling is in seconds, right? And so it's that's definitely a tool that's made us much more efficient. And I agree with you. I think AI is going to have a similar kind of impact in different ways, right? But I think it definitely can, I can't imagine it myself, like what AI can do. I think it's beyond my ability to kind of imagine it, but it's like, I think of how much Google and smartphones have changed the world from when I was a teenager, or even when I was getting my PhD back in the 80s. I mean, we used a typewriter to type the paper. We didn't have word processors or computers, for that kind of use. So, the world changes for the better.
Yeah. And I think it'll make research somewhat more accessible. So if you needed to previously hire someone to do like repetitive, like coding jobs, you could teach the AI to replace them, which then means, people who are researchers from wealthier universities that have a lot of funds to hire people versus that who don't. I think it equalizes science in some sense actually as well.
I think you have to be very careful though. I think you have to check its work.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely.
Because I don't know. I don't know that I ever would leave anything to a machine.
Yeah. So there's a paper that we're writing at the moment with Larissa Barley, who's one of our PhD Masters by Research students. So what we did was we coded a whole bunch of brand names for whether they were suggestive or not of the category attributes or the category itself. And then we tested it with ChatGPT-4, which is the premium paid version. And we calculated like the intercoder reliability, essentially, like the expert coders versus the AI. The intercoder reliability was really high. I think it was close to 90%, which
Wow.
then gave us enough confidence to say, okay, if we pump this through, maybe 10% of them are not going to be exactly what we'd say, but for the amount of stuff that we can code, we're willing to give up that accuracy for cost, time, and geez, if I had to repetitively do that, I don't think I'd want to show up to work. So yeah, it's kind of that trade-off between accuracy but yeah, I agree with you. You definitely need to check its homework. So things are really, yeah, in terms of shopper research, I think that's an interesting one for VR as well. So I recently bought a Meta Quest 3. So it's one of those VR sort of headsets, looking to develop a bit of a research agenda there. And Byron's buying a couple of those Apple Vision Pros that you're aware of now. So yeah, there's some stuff there, but I think we're looking more from advertising and media exposure there. So that's going to be really cool. No news there from the Institute on that part, but do stay tuned. Really enjoyed catching up with you again. So are you mentioned no holidays this year, but are you coming back to Australia at all, or New Zealand, or anywhere down in our part of the world?
Well, I'm going below the equator in June, but I'm going to stay in the Western Hemisphere. Nancy and I are going to the Galapagos.
Oh, nice.
In June, and then we're going to pop over to Peru and go to Machu Picchu.
Mm-hmm.
So we'll be doing that in June. I think that, I love Adelaide. I love the Institute. I love being there and doing everything. And as I sort of think about, coming back, I need to have a real purpose for coming, right? Where I need to be there to do what I need to do. And right now, I don't see that in the near future, right? So, I needed to be there to start getting things set up to do research remotely. And so as long as I can continue to do that, I don't necessarily see a need to come back.
Yeah.
And there's other places in the world I haven't been. Like I would love to go to Africa, on safari, and so I know Nancy would like to do that too. So as much as I love Adelaide and the Institute, I don't have a plan yet to come back because I don't have a need to come back. I have a desire to come back. I could live in Adelaide. I just, I could come to the Institute every day. Like I said, if I were in Adelaide, I'd go down and live in Glenelg like I did last time and take the flight, and I would just pop in every day and make a nuisance of myself.
What you're telling me is I need to come visit you.
Excuse me. Yes, of course. Yeah, and I'll take you out on our boat that didn't get washed away in the flood. But no, it's, I think that's the thing. It's like, like Nancy's like, you go down there and you fly all the way down there and you get a Airbnb and you do, and you're gone for 6 weeks. And I'm like, yeah, I know, but I kind of like it and it's a lot of fun. But to me, I'm not sure. I don't know what's in the cards, Zach, and I'm never going to say never because I want to come back.
Yeah.
I need to have a good reason to come.
Yeah. No, that totally makes sense.
And by the way, I've opened up my house to any Ehrenberg-Bass researcher who's traveling to America. Like, come here on a weekend on your way to somewhere else, and I'll give you a free bed, and we'll go hiking, and we'll do whatever. And we'll have some fun, and we'll talk about science. And Carl's been a couple times. Nicole almost made it once. So I'm hoping Byron will come visit on his next visit to the U.S. So, and maybe when people come to the U.S. to do the executive education for how brands grow, I might get a visit or two on either end of that seminar as well. So we'll see. I mean, I plan to continue to do what I'm doing, and I feel like I need to ramp up the pace at which I'm doing stuff. But part of it is, like I'm writing this paper on switching or not switching, whatever, however you want to put it. And in order for that thing to get published, it needs new data from kilts. And so I'm kind of like, I can do it, but like, how can I do this and be part of it? What's the, that's the challenge for me.
So one of the things that I've noticed is, and I think this is true of no matter where I visit, if you ask the locals, like, where should I go visit? What should I see? What's like a must do? They're actually kind of the worst people to ask because, we're in our day-to-day lives, we're in our routines, we're very habitual sort of behaviors that we don't actually kind of see our own little part of the world through that sort of eyes, right? But you have this unique perspective where you've been here a couple of times and for a decent period of time. Like, do you have like a top 3 sort of list that you would recommend for anyone who would come to Adelaide?
Oh, to Adelaide.
Or Australia?
Well, I can do both. I mean, I think Adelaide is, you have to come in March, right?
Yeah.
Which is when all the festivals are going on. Go to Fringe and go to Adelaide and go to I think what I tried to do when I was in Adelaide is I immersed myself in Adelaide.
Mm.
So this last trip, I went to the Adelaide Cup, the horse race. Have you ever been?
No, I can't say I've ever been.
I knew you hadn't. But it was fantastic. And, so it's like, and it was like, because I was down in Glenelg, the tram stop was right there. I just got right on the tram and went. And, it was, fantastic. And then, of course, I've been to Adelaide both times I was there, and which is a big music festival, as you know. And a couple of times I've been to some of the Fringe events. And so coming in March is great because the weather's good and everything's on. I think the wine situation is fabulous. I did a Barossa tour, like where you hopped on and hopped off a bus, and got to see 4 or 5 vineyards that way. That was a very good way to do it because you don't have to worry about driving, and you had plenty of time to go and sample a lot of different wines, and then bring some stuff home. And then I've been to Adelaide Hills and also the McLaren Vale. Lots of really cool little vineyards there. So I think that's all really good. The one thing I haven't done in South Australia that I would like to do if I come back is go to Kangaroo Island.
Yeah, gorgeous.
Haven't done that. But I think sort of the top things at Adelaide are the wine regions, the festivals in March. Other than that, Adelaide is just a very, very livable city with like good restaurants and, stuff to do all the time. And, I could very easily live in Adelaide. In Australia, I mean, I think people don't think to come to Adelaide. It's not on the top of the list. People will come. I mean, everybody wants to go to Sydney and see the Opera House and the Harbour Bridge and so on. And I think my bucket list thing for going back to Australia is to be in Sydney on New Year's Eve.
Yes. I think that's even Australians' bucket list. People who don't live in Sydney, it would definitely be on ours. Yeah.
Yeah, but I think Sydney's a must do. You don't need to be in Sydney for that long. 3 or 4 days is plenty. But Sydney is a must do. I've probably been to more places in Australia than you have.
Probably.
Because when I'm there, I take advantage of it. You can do it anytime. You just don't do it. But I've been to the top end, and I think the Kakadu and those parks and those are really fantastic. I like that. I dove on the Great Barrier Reef. It wasn't great for me because it was like my first diving experience, and a cyclone had come through, and so it was kind of rough, and the visibility wasn't great. So I'd like to get an opportunity to do that again. Last trip I was there, I did Western Australia for 10 days. So I went to Rottnest Island and saw the quokkas, and then we went up the coast and we were at Kalbarri and Karajini, and I went swimming in the ocean with manta rays and whale sharks. And, so that was a fabulous experience too. A lot of time in the car because it's so vast. I tell people Western Australia, our biggest state is Alaska, and it's huge. Western Australia is 1.5 times larger than Alaska. It's huge.
Yeah,
You only scratch the surface of it in 10 days. And so I think that the place I haven't been yet also that I'd like to go is Tasmania. It's the one state I haven't visited yet. So I do have some reasons to come back from a tourism perspective. but I haven't. Yeah.
The ANZMAC, that conference, is in first time ever. It's in Tasmania. So yeah, university. Yeah. So that's first time. Oh, first week of December.
You're talking about like
This
9
year.
months from now. 10 months from now.
Yeah.
All right. So I need to get cracking on this paper.
Yeah.
That would give me a reason. That would give me a reason to come to Australia to present.
I love Tassie. I mean, I know you like nature and hiking and stuff like that. So you can just rent a car there, not that expensive. And Tassie's really cool because every hour and a half you drive, you kind of feel like you're in a new microclimate and the landscape changes. So, stunning. There you go. I'm trying to lure you here.
Well, I would definitely, if I had an ANZMAC paper that was accepted, I would find a way to come down and present it.
Very, very cool. So I think I've very much enjoyed. I mean, we can just talk forever, and we've hung out quite a lot, and we just don't shut up. But I thought like a nice way to wrap up this conversation is to try to think of the past, but also kind of the present. So given that you've retired, what do you think the person who retired, for the first time with your first PhD, obviously not in marketing, would say to the person now who finished their career in marketing now and loves it? Like, what do you think that conversation would be like?
So can you ask that question again? I didn't.
Yeah. Sorry. What would Bob of, maybe 30 years of age say to Bob now?
But 30-year-old Bob would be astonished at what 65-year-old Bob had done. I mean, I think that, I listened to like Jenny and Byron and people sort of talk about like, how did they get into marketing science? And in a lot of ways, it was a big grand accident for both of them.
Yeah.
And I think it was for me too, right? Like I started out, you really don't know what you want to do or what you're good at when you're 18 and you're going off to college. And, I wanted to be a doctor initially, partly because my mom kept sort of poking me to be a doctor. And then I kind of realized I really don't want to do that. And I was good at chemistry. And so I pursued chemistry and got a PhD and became a professor and all that kind of stuff and wrote papers. And and it was not a super satisfying career, which is kind of strange that like I love academia now, but I didn't like it when it was my job.
Yeah.
Right. And which is, I mean, it's kind of interesting. I kind of said I didn't really like part of what I did at SEJ because some of it I didn't really enjoy doing. And in a lot of ways, academia is better because you have bigger options, but I didn't like being an academic. And I went to get an MBA so I could do something different. And I fell in love with marketing from the classes I took, and I don't care if it was Kotler was the textbook or not. I mean, it felt like you're at the center of things and, you have to understand the consumer and all that kind of stuff. And then I had where this being a scientist was so helpful to me is I was like going through these marketing and having my own little individual case studies, right? I'm like, what can I learn from this? Like what worked, what didn't work? And I was kind of like doing, I said this the last time we talked, I was kind of like my own little marketing scientist and sort of coming up with sort of theories about how the world worked based on what I had seen and what was replicable, right? And that was the difference between, I think, maybe how I would approach it versus someone else who didn't have the scientific training, right? I was really trying to find sort of what the causes were and, did this work in every occasion or not? And then when I got exposed to how brands grow and, it's like the scales fell from my eyes and it was like, yes, I've kind of been seeing this all along.
Yeah.
And I even, one of the things that, I mean, this is kind of a crazy thing, but there's a branch of physical science called statistical mechanics, which is about taking the quantum mechanical, the atomistic view of the world and using the laws there to calculate what you see in the macro space. And I always felt like that there was this sort of stochastic randomness to marketing and consumer behavior. And it turns out Well, guess what? That's the Dirichlet consumer, right?
Mm.
It's like that, it's the consumers behave as if random. And I always felt like there was this sort of thing about individual consumer behavior, and you aggregate over the population, then you get what's in the panel, right? And that's sort of like, we would have called that, you call that the ensemble average, right? When you're looking at statistical mechanics. And so like, I even had this, like, I was connecting like things that I knew about, like, relating quantum mechanics to classical thermodynamics, right? With statistical mechanics to like consumer behavior, to what you see in the marketplace, right? So this was all like stupid stuff going on in my head that like, I didn't really have like I couldn't work on a theory of it, right? I wasn't academic, right? But it was like, it made sense to me. And then when I sort of see, that, you can predict things like, how many people buy a brand 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times based on a couple of inputs, right? And because they do behave as if random, they're not behaving randomly, but it looks random, right? So that kind of stuff. So in some ways, I kind of fell into, what I'm doing now, my interest with the Institute. I came by it honestly in a way, but complete and total accident, right? That the whole thought process and the way that you look at the world makes so much sense to someone who's trained as a scientist, right? So the scientist Bob would not have been surprised at the Bob who thinks that way, but the scientist Bob would have been astonished that the marketing Bob could make TV ads and, that was doing that kind of job, because because that job wasn't science when I was doing it, right? I didn't know about Ehrenberg-Bass, right? I only knew Kotler and what I was trained by my bosses on how to do things. So, yeah, so I think that I've had an interesting life journey, right? To go from that place to what I had done, and then to where I am now. In some ways, it feels a little bit like full circle.
Okay.
Because of the science aspect of it.
Yeah. I like that. I think your first word really hit home. Astonished. I think honestly that's an incredible word to use, I think, and yeah, I can't think of a better one. Yeah, thank you so much for taking time out of your evening to enlighten us again, and being the very first ever repeat guest on the podcast. We very much appreciate it.
I hope it was worthwhile.
Yeah, and now I'm gonna, hopefully we'll see you in Tassie, but who knows? And if not, I'll try my best to come to North America and come visit you.
Yes, I would love that, and bring Shaz.
Oh, yes, absolutely. All right.
Thanks so much, Zach.
Bye.
Hey guys, it's Zac Anesbury here with just a couple of quick reminders. If you've enjoyed today's podcast, then make sure you subscribe so you never miss an episode. There are plenty more interviews to come with some of the world's leading marketing academics and practitioners. You do not want to miss these. In the meantime, if you're looking for another way to connect, then follow me on Twitter at Zac Anesbury. That is ZACANESBURY. For my take on the marketing issues of the day.
That was the Zac Anesbury Show.